Hi, I am Dr. Jacob Lauritsen, and this is Read, Write, and Cite. This video, we're gonna start something a little bit different. This is gonna start a series on literature topics, things to help you with the literature side of your English classes. And we're gonna be talking about William Shakespeare. This video, I'm gonna talk about the kinds of things you need to know about Shakespeare, and specifically about his writing before you start reading a Shakespeare play. Shakespeare can be a little bit intimidating to try and read. He wrote a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, in a different country for many of you, talking about things that don't exist anymore, using words we don't use anymore, and it can be incredibly intimidating. But you don't have to be. William Shakespeare was the son of John Shakespeare, who was a glover, kind of a town councilman, kind of like the mayor of a town that he lived in Stratford-upon-Avon in England. He didn't live in London when he was born. He grew up in this town, but because his dad was, high enough in the community, he was able to get a good education. We don't know much about that education, but he was smart enough that he was able to get a lot of ideas that would later show up in his play. Speaking of his plays, we're not even sure how many he wrote. Right now, I think scholars agree that there's about 38 plays. Some of which were published with his permission during his lifetime, but most of what we see was collected by his friends that he performed with, that he wrote with, that he worked with in what's called the First Folio. That was published in 1623. That was a long time ago, and it was several years after he died. In the 1600s, theater wasn't the same as what it is today. Today, when you think of the theater, you think of this dark building, you got these nice seats, maybe you're dressed up a little bit, there's gonna be a curtain, maybe there's like some sort of, cheese or wine and intermission that's expensive, more expensive than going to a movie theater, and everybody's kind of fancy and hoity-toity and sounds like they're really very smart and intellectual. And maybe that's true. Theater at the time of Shakespeare is a little bit different. Research shows that on an average day in London, maybe about 1/3 of the population would go to a play every day. That puts it on the level of watching Netflix or YouTube or just turning on the TV. It was incredibly common for people to go watch theater at the time of Shakespeare, not because Shakespeare was just so amazing, that was their entertainment. That's what they did. So theater wasn't just for the elite, it wasn't just for the rich people, the poor people were there too. In fact, that's one of the reasons why at the time of Shakespeare, some people up in the government, particularly the Puritans, who'd later gain power, they weren't big fans of theater. It was sinful. It was people pretending to be something that they're not. They're dressing up, and the people that went to the theater, they weren't always good. There's bad things happening in the crowd, and there's a lot going on. It was common entertainment. When we think of Shakespeare today, we think, I just can't get into it. I can't access what he's talking about because this is for people who are smarter than me. No, Shakespeare wrote for the everyman, for the every woman. The average person could show up and understand and enjoy one of his plays. Hopefully we can get that idea out of our heads and realize Shakespeare really wrote his stuff for everybody. And he wrote all sorts of kind of stuff. About half of his plays are comedies. But usually we don't study the comedies because, in high school you're gonna read Romeo and Juliet, you're gonna read Julius Caesar, Macbeth, and Hamlet. You're gonna read the real serious stuff. We don't usually, unless you're taking a college lit class or something, read the fun stuff, the Twelfth Night, the Taming of the Shrew, the silly, crazy stuff where it's gender bending, men are dressing up as, or women are dressed as men, and there's twins, and everyone's getting confused, and people are falling in love that they shouldn't be falling in love with, and that's Shakespeare. But you can also see that happens with a lot of the shows that we have today. It is so much more accessible than we probably give ourselves credit for. Let me explain a couple things. We probably need to know about what the theater was like. First of all, theaters were outside, right? They didn't have electricity. Shakespeare's most famous theater, the Globe, was basically a big courtyard with several balconies, right? There was an open area where people could stand at the probably not with chairs, right? There's the stage, and then there's balconies, a couple balconies up. They probably had chairs. They were probably for the fancier people. But the average person could buy, pay a little bit, show up, and stand and watch a show, which was performed outdoors in the middle of the day. Why? Because that's when you could see the stage. So because of that, the experience was very different. They couldn't fade the lights out like they can with the play today. They didn't have big curtains that could obstruct the view of the stage because it was right there in front of everybody. And so the way that the actors, and by extension the writer, Shakespeare, could convey ideas to the audience was by describing them. Let me give you an example. Let's take the beginning of Hamlet. Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 1, you've got the guards. They're on guard, they're scared, they're nervous because they think, well, for one, they keep seeing this ghost that's showing up, Hamlet's father, and they expect Norway to come and attack them. There's a jet overhead. Just a second. Okay, so at the beginning of Hamlet, the guards they're nervous, they're expecting to be attacked. They think Norway's on the way to come and attack them, and Norway is on the way. And there's this ghost that's been showing up there, so they're totally scared. But how do you get that idea to an audience who doesn't know all that? Well, so you've got the guards, you've got Francisco, and then Bernardo comes in there, and he's like, "Who's there?" And say, "Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself." That's not a phrase that we use. We don't unfold. But he says, "Long live the king." How do you show your allegiance that you belong? You say, "Long live the king." He goes, "Bernardo, you come most carefully upon your hour. 'Tis now struck 12. Get thee to bed, Francisco." So he's telling him what time it is. Why? So the audience knows. Oh, it's midnight. It's midnight. So now we know because of the description. "For this relief much thanks. 'Tis bitter cold." How do they know it's cold? He just told the audience. Does that make sense? This is what it was like at the time of Shakespeare. Special effects for things like launching cannons and stuff like that, or banging loud metal sheets or something to get an effect across. In fact, it was a cannon that burnt down the globe. And they wore really, really fancy costumes. At the time of Shakespeare, you couldn't dress above your station. So if you're a poor person, you couldn't dress like a rich person unless you were an actor. An actor, they could dress like that. It was the exception to the rule. Also, they didn't have a lot of sets. What they had was just built into the theater, a couple entrances down below, and then they had a balcony with a couple entrances and exits up top, and then just the theater. And every day they might perform a different play. They'd have a flag that would be outside of the theater, and it would go up, and that flag, would indicate it's a comedy or it's a tragedy or something like that. So people would be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I want to go see a comedy today. I'm gonna go to the theater today." And they could tell by looking at the flag. But because they weren't always doing the same thing every day, they couldn't have really fancy sets to move around. Everything was done with a costume and with the description of what they're saying. In fact, at the time of Shakespeare, they didn't say, "Let's go watch a play." They'd say, "Let's go hear a play." Because it was so much more about the listening. In today's society, that's kind of hard to understand. One of the other important things to know about Shakespeare is Shakespeare didn't write a lot of descriptions except for someone enters, someone exits, they fight, someone dies, they kiss. That's about all the description he put in it. He wouldn't show someone's crossing across the stage, they go over, they pick this up, they do that. None of that was in there, in part because Shakespeare was there with them. He wasn't writing plays for some random, theater some far away to do it. He wrote plays for his troupe to do. And he would be there. Sometimes he'd help direct, sometimes he'd act a little bit, but largely his biggest contribution was writing the show. One of the real common things a lot of people know is there were no female actresses. There were no actresses at the time of Shakespeare. All theater was performed by men or boys whose voices hadn't changed. So that's probably how they chose their women, is they'd have someone younger who could, whose voices could sound like a woman, and then they'd wear their fancy costumes and their makeup. By today's standards, that seems a little bit strange, but it also makes sense why Shakespeare did so much gender bending in his plays. You might have, in Twelfth Night, for example, you have a woman who's pretending to be her brother, and everyone believes it, and yet she's in love with the man that she's helping fall in love with another woman, and that other woman falls in love with her. she's pretending to be a man, so it's the man, a boy, pretending to be a woman dressed up as a man that has another man dressed as a woman pretending to be in love with her even though she's supposed to be a man. You see how you might think that's kind of funny. These are just a couple points. We're gonna do more videos like this. If you like videos like this, please let me know in the comments so that I can make more like this. If you like it, if there's something you would like me to talk about, please let me know. I plan on doing a couple more literature videos in the future, and I appreciate your comments. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.